So, guys, I want to talk about Novi, and he did a video for AEW, and he talked about that they had a huge issue with emphasis, de-emphasis. And I do want to apologize because I'm a little bit nervous because I'm at work right now, and it's kind of dead. But I just wanted to do this video because if I don't do it now, then I have to wait a couple of days. But yes, AEW does have a huge issue with de-emphasis, and what that means is that you take a wrestler who's supposed to be popular and is actually drawing a lot of attention, and you book them poorly. You ultimately screw the pooch on them. A classic example would be in TNA wrestling, with what a lot of people have criticized during, throughout their whole entire run, and especially during the Hogan and Bischoff era, which was how they would push WCW and ECW and WWE people instead of TNA originals. And I really think with AEW that they're running into that issue where they're really picking and choosing who they want to push, and they're not looking at who is a star, who isn't a star, who's at home, who should be brought back into AEW. And definitely, I think that the big issue is Tony Khan, and I also think it's the Young Bucks and everybody else who has creative decision power. So I want to go down like a bunch of different talking points. That I think the biggest thing that Novi was talking about was the main event picture. And right now there are a bunch of main event wrestlers, but the biggest ones really are Swerve, Hangman, and Swerve, Hangman, and Will Ospreay. So the big issue, one of the big issues that they have is a really bad main event scene. And part of it is because Tony wants to do what he wants to do, really. So what happened this year was that they went from Swerve to Bryan Danielson to Jon Moxley. A lot of people were saying, just like Novi, is that it should have went to Swerve to Hangman, and they could have even done, Hangman versus Jon Moxley, and then you could have done like a fatal four-way at, World's End, where it's like Hangman, Swerve, Moxley, and Darby Allin, or you put Will Ospreay in it if he wasn't in the Continental Classic, really. But that's also one of the big issues that they have, really, is that Tony Khan was very persistent on saying, no, we want to put the title on Bryan Danielson because he's retiring from a full-time wrestler to a part-time wrestler, and that wasn't like the right plan, really, because honestly, if you have a babyface like Bryan Danielson become a champion, then it's almost like, okay, who's going to be like the antagonist? And that's what happened with Moxley. Moxley became the antagonist. Easy thing to do is to do that thing where your faction turns against you. And now Moxley needs to have a group of heroes, and it's like the heart and soul of AEW, really. So ultimately, because they chose to be persistent about putting a title on Bryan Danielson, he even didn't want to become the AEW champion. You create this whole mess, really, instead of just saying, okay, yes, Bryan Danielson does draw an audience, but I don't feel that Moxley feuding with Orange Cassidy, or Moxley feuding with, the heart and soul of AEW, which is the Dark Order, Wheeler Yuta, and a couple of other people in his faction and other factions, Evil Uno and other people, is the right thing. And that brings so ultimately they're throwing storytelling under the bus for what they want to do or who they want to push, and that's just not good. And the other issue I would say with that is that there are many wrestlers that in AEW that should not be pushed. For example, I know people like Nick Wayne, and people appreciate his work ethic, but Nick Wayne should not be a superstar because, honestly, he looks like a kid out of high school. Another person who should not be pushed is the Dark Order. Like, they're clown wrestlers. Honestly, they go from losing it all the time, and now they're being pushed. You look at Brandon Cutler. One of the big talking points with the Orange Cassidy feud is trying to make, I think, I forgot, that person that he was palling around with, not Mike Bennett, but somebody like Trent Beretta, a big deal or whatever. But it seems like that's another big issue with AEW, is that part of their de-emphasis is that they want to push who they want to push. Yes, you should create new stars, but there's a huge difference between somebody like Matt Taven and Mike Bennett, who, you know, I like them. They're really great wrestlers. You know, they have like a really good look versus, you know, somebody like Wheeler Yuta, who looks like, you know, he looks like a nerdy Amish kid. Like if Steve Urkel was a Amish person, that would be Wheeler Yuta. So, you know, they're not really good. They've not been good about pushing people that are legitimate. And also, as I've talked about Orange Cassidy, like Orange Cassidy should not be wrestling for a world heavyweight title because he really, really struggles to take himself seriously. So another big problem is, you know, people is AEW pushing wrestlers at the top of the card who, you know, don't really deserve it. And then I also will say that a third issue with the emphasis is wrestlers being in charge of storylines. That sometimes Vince McMahon and other people have it correct, and sometimes the wrestlers don't have it correct. You know, and as I said, one great example is Bully Ray and Aces with the Aces and Eights in TNA Wrestling. Or you look at what happened at WrestleMania 9, I believe, where it was like Hulk Hogan. It was like Yokozuna beat Bret Hart, and then you had Hulk Hogan come out and, you know, win it. Or you have John Cena beating the Nexus, really. You know, so there's times, not even in AEW, but in other companies, when wrestlers either you know, play backstage politics. You know, that doesn't work for me, brother, to get what they want. But also sometimes there may be storylines where they have power in it, and they keep that alive when it's not working. And there's a couple of things that I'll say. I think, honestly, with, you know, the Young Bucks earlier this year, you know, you had Sting and Darby Allin, but then you did something where you make the Young Bucks, you know, privileged champions of AEW. And here were some problems with that. That, first of all, they're not believable because, again, they sound like nerdy high schoolers. They don't have the presentation and the look. And one of their heel turns was they don't defend the titles that much. And that was actually a very bad thing because, honestly, what makes the Young Bucks a really great draw is their matches, really. So they could have been like that, like I say, that Ric Flair type of heel, where with Ric Flair, he at least had the matches, and he had like long matches and great performances. He wasn't just like, I'm just going to hold on to the title and rarely defend it, you know. So it's ultimately wrestlers picking what's not working. And I also will say that maybe they thought that was the way to conduct themselves. And then also you add the fact that when they beat Private Party, they just went home, really. And they did a comedy angle by saying, oh, well, it's an unfair workplace, I want to work at home. And you had Brandon Cutler just do something stupid. So, you know, that's also another issue, is that, you know, sometimes, you know, as I said, with wrestlers, they want to do storylines or they want to do their angles, and they don't know what works for them. And that's kind of why I say with AEW, they need to have a creative director. That's why you need to hire Jim Cornette. That's why you need to have like a Scott D'Amore, I believe. Or you need to have like some people who really understand professional wrestling and be like, okay, Tony, this is the wrestler. This is how they want to play out an idea. And this is not working. So we have to change, and we got to be like, okay, we can continue this and make it make sense, or we have to, you know, like have them drop the title and have like a exit plan, you know, and then work on something different. I think that that's one of the big problems. And I want to talk about the Death Riders. You know, like that's not working for a lot of reasons. As I said, that Moxley's been the AEW champion before, so him having another reign is just, you know, the same old shit. The other thing, too, is that you look at his faction, none of them are talkers, you know, so, you know, Cesaro's not a talker, Pac's not a talker, Wheeler Utah's not a talker, so you don't have, like, people who are good on the microphone. And then the other thing, too, is that when you look at the Moxley faction, they're controversial because they're inspired by neo-Nazis and skinheads. That automatically, if I was a wrestler, you know, if I was in charge of a wrestling promotion, I would say that, okay, you're not going to be inspired by American History X or Romp or Stomp or any of those films, because obviously you look at our culture nowadays, and that would be, in a very sensitive culture, that's just not a good idea, really, you know, because, you know, people are very sensitive. So you have a wrestler that's inspired by that. The other thing is that Moxley makes no sense on the microphone. You know, like I said, he sounds like a poor man's Bray Wyatt. So obviously when you push him to the moon, really, he doesn't he really does incorporate his weaknesses a lot. And I would also say that another part of it is that whole entire thing about him and his buddies taking this pickup truck and driving around the desert and all that stuff. What's really that? That's just abstract art, really. That's just there to be there. And then the other part of it is that honestly, you look at Team AEW, and one of the people in it is Jeff Jarrett, and people talk about how Jeff Jarrett is somebody who is a glory hog. And honestly, you have Jeff Jarrett, you have Evil Uno, you have Private Party, you have Satnam Singh, and a couple other people. And I heard that there was a backstage story that some of these wrestlers were actually people who were like, okay, you know what, Tony promised me that they're going to get a big push or whatever, really. But if these people have been losing over the years, they've not been booked properly, you're going to expect me to believe that, they're actually the people that are going to take over the company or take it back, really. It makes no sense. For example, I know like OTR Central, he talked about like one of the reasons why he stopped watching TNA wrestling was because Eric Young became the TNA champion. So you took a joke wrestler and you made him the champion of the company. Imagine if TNA Wrestling had Shark Boy and Eric Young, try to take it back from the Aces and Eights. No one would find that believable. Or if you had Santino Marella, R-Truth, and the Gobbledygooker, and the Bastion Booger, and the Brooklyn Brawler form a team. They try to take down, try to take down like the McMahons or something like that. It just wouldn't be believable. So sometimes this big issue with the emphasis is emphasizing wrestlers that really don't deserve a push, really, and frankly, backstage politics pushes them. So sometimes wrestlers are not good with even choosing their own creative direction, or they may be insistent on getting their way when it doesn't work. And de-emphasis is also something that happens in other divisions. Like you look at the tag team division, and in the tag team division, yes, they kind of ruined it a lot, really, because of the EVP storyline, and I've talked about that. And then it's also like with Private Party, like, you see what's happening nowadays. Like the biggest emphasis in AEW is the Continental Classic and hints at the main event of World's End, really. But we don't see Private Party come out. We don't even see them, like, even watch the Continental Classic and be like, you know what? What if there's two people that lose in the Continental Classic, like whoever's the last place people, if they have a hell of a performance, we can take those two people become a team, they face us. Or, they talk about how, they have some goals for next year and they hope to be champions, for at least a year, defend it at All In, that's their goal, really. And then you see Brian Cage or other people face them, really. So there's under emphasis in the tag team division. They just won the titles, but they've not been on television for a couple of weeks, really. So that's been an issue with AEW, is that they don't really prioritize titles, and when titles have mean things, that's a big deal. The other thing that I want to say is, there's also the women's division, and I've said this many times that, one of the big problems with the women's division is that they overemphasize the Japanese wrestlers, and I'm not like, anti-Japanese, but the thing is that you can't have wrestlers that most people don't know about, and you can't have wrestlers that speak Japanese and they don't speak English, and they don't get over with the American audience. For example, on Dynamite, one of the worst rated shows was when they had a match between Emi Sakura and Mercedes Moné, and Mercedes Moné was just making jokes about how Emi Sakura has been wrestling for a long time and she's in her 40s. But, you look at to an average person and they're like, who the hell is Emi Sakura? That doesn't make any sense. You look at Anna Jay and you look at how well she was pushed. They said, okay, this is Anna Jay. She's had matches in Japan. She speaks English. She actually can, talk to the microphone. She's known for having hardcore matches and other things like that. So obviously, a person like Anna Jay should be pushed because she gets over an American audience. Emi Sakura is not that person. And then the other issue with the women's division is, is Toni Storm and Mariah May. Like this whole starlet, Sunset Boulevard wannabe crap is a little too old. It's been going on for like a year and a half. More than likely, you're going to see Mariah May versus Toni Storm Part 2. And it does make sense because in the Australia show, I believe Toni Storm's from New Zealand and the Oceania area. So obviously, you're going to do that. But the big problem is it just runs itself it runs itself way over too much. It just gets kind of bored. So, in the women's division, they've had a bunch of problems really with who they should push, who should be pushed and all that. And there's two more areas I want to talk about. I think that there's storylines and wrestlers that either don't care or go on too long, or their storyline goes on too long. And I would say that, MJF versus Adam Cole is a great example. Like, I really think that with MJF, in my opinion, he doesn't care as much as he did. And I remember when he became AEW champion, the first thing he said with the title is that he wants to expand AEW. He wants to have shows in Mexico. He wants to really expand to different audiences. And he also says that he wanted to be a wrestler that was serious and gives a shit. He's sick and tired of the comedy wrestlers or the joke wrestlers. And what did he do? He went from doing that to doing like the pickle spoof of CM Punk and the Cookies. And then after that, he did dance-offs with Adam Cole. And then obviously with the Devil storyline, that's kind of kept him, busy for like about 2 years. And now one of his big drawing points is that one of the big things he says is like how he's in Hollywood and how he's on movie sets, and he's really focused on his movie career. Like, he really just he's coming off as a heel, but he's also really emphasizing that he does not care about being there, and he doesn't really care about the feuds that he had. He really is seeing professional wrestling as a launching point for his movie career and his producing career, because obviously, if you had the choice between being a movie star and a professional wrestler, you would want to be a movie star. You make a lot more money, and it's not that bad in the body, really, So when you have wrestlers like them, you really don't have them. You really don't do something like say, hey, MGF, you are a big draw, really, and I know you're focused on your movie career, but there has to be parts of the year, or the company's struggling, so we need to fly you from Los Angeles to tapings, really, and all that stuff. So one of the big problems with AEW is the de-emphasis is that they're allowing some wrestlers to even insult the company or do what they want with feuds. Like, that's why you need to have a good happy medium. Wrestlers need to suggest storylines and in their creative direction. But if it's not working, you got bookers do that, and sometimes the bookers are not doing their job. Pardon me, I have a cold. You have to meet in the middle, really. And, that also brings me to another problem that I see with AEW. And I think that, in general, people staying at home. And I know that this is a controversial one. Yes, I do agree that if there are wrestlers that don't want to be there and they don't want to show up to tapings, you can either fire them, or you can do something like be like, okay, you got 5 years on your contract. You're going to sit at home for 5 years. I'm not going to release you. And one of the reasons why you do that is to punish them, because it's like what people say about the death penalty. Sometimes a worse punishment is to live instead of being killed off quickly. So it is a good punishment to keep people at home, really, and not let them out of their contracts. So you kind of send a message that, okay, you're not going to do what you want, really. We're going to waste you because, you know what, you have a lot of potential. You can do a lot of things for us. And you choose not to be there. Like, I think in those cases that works, really. But if there's a wrestler that it's not working out and they're suggesting good ideas and they want to be part of things, and they're not getting the call back, and other things like that, then I can kind of like say, okay, then I don't mind those wrestlers being released immediately because at least they cared, but they're not being utilized. So I think with like Ray Phoenix and the Lucha Bros, I would say the exact same thing about them, which is that, they did a lot for AEW. So I think Tony should release them. And I also look at someone like Ricky Starks. I feel a little mixed about him, because Ricky Starks, there was a story that after the Sting storyline, he wanted to be a villain, but they said, no, you got to come back as a babyface, So I think that, with him disagreeing, I feel a little mixed about him. But I do emphasize what other people say, and that he's saying. Like, I think that, obviously he's allowed to do bookings, but now they're removing him from some bookings. He did the Ariel Helwani podcast, and he was like even saying, if that's true, it's true, which is, he's not being utilized, and it highlights an issue with AEW not utilizing people. But there are people like him. If Ricky Starks is a person that's trying to be utilized and they're not utilizing him, I think as a booker, I'll be nice enough to release that person, or be like, okay, within the next 30 days, we got to have a use for you on television. And if we can't come to an agreement, I'm going to release you just because you show that you care, really. And I respect people that care versus people who don't care. And that leads me to the other issue of emphasis and recruiting, which is you have many wrestlers at home. You have Ricky Starks at home. You have the Lucha Bros at home. You had Mark Henry, who could have been a great commentator. You had Paul White, who, could have been featured more and even in matches. You have Miro, who said he recovered. I know he's out with an injury. You have Keith Lee, who's been out for a long time, really. And there are a lot of other wrestlers who've been sitting at home waiting for a call, really. So, when you have wrestlers like that, you got to say, okay, who's that television? And who shouldn't we really be pushing, really? For example, if you have Miro, I would rather you push Miro, Wardlow, Matt Taven, and Mike Bennett. I'd rather have you push those 4 people than, Evil Uno, Josh Alexander. I think I'm saying his name correctly. John Silver, Orange Cassidy, Wheeler Yuta, Nick Wayne, and all those other people, really. Because you want to push people that are going to draw you money. You're not wanting to push people who are kind of the comedy wrestlers or the silly wrestlers, or clearly don't have a potential. And I think some of it comes down to, obviously Nick Wayne is friends with Darby Allin, so you got to make him happy. The Dark Order are friends with Brody Lee, and there are a lot of friends that Brody King, and there are a lot of wrestlers that are friends with Brody King when he was alive. Brody Lee or Brody King, I don't remember his name, but the point of it is that I think that sometimes Tony doesn't want to upset people, so there's a lot of wrestlers that he needs to filter out, really. So, there has to be a huge sense of him saying, no, these are people who I know are profitable. I'm going to keep them, or I'm going to recruit them from home. And here are the people who are not profitable. This is a business. This is not a charity. See you later. Or if I promise you something, sometimes I have to go back on my promise, because in the end of the day, it's about making money. The other thing, I think the last thing that I'll talk about is Will Ospreay. That there's some things about Will Ospreay that de-emphasizes him. I think the first thing is that, like I've said, I would not include him in the Continental Classic, because the problem is that, as I said, with Will Ospreay, if you have too many Will Ospreay matches, they don't become special. And it's like with him and Ricochet, that honestly they should have never had that match until All In, because they made that match anticlimactic by having it, and then because you've seen so many Will Ospreay matches, it got to a point where people were calling it gymnastics, really. So the problem is that, I think they overexposed Will Ospreay. The other thing with Will Ospreay is that he wrestles a certain style, and a Will Ospreay match is a bunch of no selling and a very long performance and a lot of flips and high aerial moves. And I think that, as I said, that he's one of those people that you have Ric Flair under contract. You can always talk. You can have him, and you can have him, Will Ospreay, and Ric Flair talk a little bit about how to improve, really, or other wrestlers to say, okay, Will Ospreay, we gotta kind of what's the word? Add physics to your match to make them more realistic. And then the other thing too is that he should always be that wrestler that makes new stars, really. So I think, as I said, him and Kyle Fletcher have been excellent, and they made Kyle Fletcher as a new star, and Kyle Fletcher's really living up to that. There's big things for Kyle Fletcher, but you have Will Ospreay with Damian Garcia. I really think that Daniel Garcia, he's really done a great job, but there's nothing that Will Ospreay's done for Daniel. There's nothing that Will Ospreay has helped Daniel Garcia with. I really think Daniel Garcia and Jack Perry helped him out, and I also think Daniel Garcia and MJF that helped out Daniel Garcia. But I really think that there's a point where, Will Ospreay may be that person right now where, he's also overexposed. Like, he was going after the tag team titles at one point, and then he was also going after, the international championship and a few other belts. So I think that if you want to make him, if you want to spread him up and down the roster, that's not good for him. I think he needs to be in the heavyweight title division. He needs to stay there because obviously he does have those matches that draw attention, and that's been consistent about him. The other thing that I will say is that, Ospreay and Darby Allin have the same issue where they kind of put them in way too many different divisions. Like Darby was in the TNT division, he was in the heavyweight division, he was in the tag team division, and I believe he was also going after the international championship, and now he's in the Continental Classic, so he's in 5 different divisions. And then you look at Will Ospreay. He was in the international division. I was in the continental division. He was in the heavyweight division. He was in the tag team division. So that's not good because that there's so much. There's really so much inconsistency when you do that. And I'm a fan of WWE and TNA wrestling. Like, I would say that if I was ever a wrestler, I would love to be a Grand Slam champion. But now I kind of understand, why. They don't allow wrestlers to kind of go after different titles. Like, there's a reason why you have The Undertaker, why The Undertaker was never an intercontinental champion. Or, there's a reason why, John Cena was never the Intercontinental champion. Or if they had The Undertaker one year defend a streak, he's not going to be facing an Intercontinental champion unless you have somebody like Gunter with his 666-day reign, or something like that, really. It would have to be a big mega thing, but that's the reason why you don't put wrestlers in different divisions, because then you de-emphasize them, because it's almost like, what the hell are they doing, really? Because they're in so many different divisions, and most people don't know, it's just like, okay, well, yay, I want to see Will Ospreay. He's in the tag team division. That's really cool. Oh, well, now he's in the heavyweight division. Now next month he's in the trios division. Now next month he's in Ring of Honor going after the heavyweight title. So if you have wrestlers like jump around too much, you really can't process anything, or it just becomes really inconsistent. I think like another great example would be if you see an actor and they're in a movie, and the movie is just, a horror film for the first 20 minutes, and then the next part of it is a comedy film, and then the next part is a fantasy film, the next part is a children's film, the next part is a porn film. You fluctuate too much. You really can't grab attention, really, because you're jumping around too much, So you de-emphasize by kind of putting people in too many different divisions. And I really agree that, part of what they have to do is make people big stars, treat people like big deals. That was one of the reasons why people watch AEW, because there were so many wrestlers being a big deal, acting like a big deal. And I also will say within that, you got to keep wrestlers consistent. You have to say, okay, well, the heavyweight division is going to be, Miro, Bobby Lashley, Darby Allin, Moxley, and Moxley, Cesaro, Brody King, and a few other people. I'm just gonna give you those guys. You can say Adam Page, and a few other ones as well. Really, those have to be the heavyweight division. And then you kind of say, okay, then who's going to be the tag division, and then they stay there, and then that's kind of what you do for between 6 months and 12 months. And then you kind of say, okay, well, all wrestlers, we need to treat them like a big deal up and down the card. And one of the big things I've said is that 100% is that you need to kind of do a mass release of wrestlers. You also need to do a mass recruiting, which means that the people at home who can draw money, bring them to television and have them on television. The people who don't draw, like the Dark Order, you have to get rid of them. And that's that, really. And then the other part of it is that, Tony has to understand that even though he's friends with people, even though, okay, well, Nick Wayne's on television, even though Nick Wayne, Darby Allin are friends, he has to be like, okay, well, Darby, you are a big star, you have a cool look, you've done all these things, but, Nick Wayne is, never really going to make it, really. It makes sense to have Ricky Starks in his spot, or it makes sense to have a Daniel Garcia, or it makes sense to, have like Heidenreich, if I'm saying his name, or Hammerstein, that wrestler who was on the Indies, or we should have Matt Cardona in his spot. That makes a lot more sense than, Nick Wayne, who looks like a high schooler, or even like with the Young Bucks, Jack Perry's really kicked it out of the park, really, and he's done a really great job. But it seems like him being the scapegoat, that storyline is over. So if they say, okay, well, Jack Perry, we don't have anything else for you, we got to let you go, be a wrestler in Japan and do great things, really. Even though he's friends with the Young Bucks, they just have to say that. And I think the other thing, too, is that it's not a friend business, it's a making money business. And then the other thing is that, you got to also have believable wrestlers. And I think that's one of the big problems now. Like I've said, if you're going to have Team AW being, Satnam Singh, who's been looked at as a joke, or you're going to have Karen Jarrett in that, and you're going to have the Dark Order, and you're going to have, Top Flight, who loses a lot, and Private Party, who loses a lot. You really have to say to yourself, when they're all waiting outside for the Moxley faction to arrive, that just looks really, really stupid, really. And that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people stop watching, because if that's your next generation, all those people, you might as well watch TNA Wrestling and watch the Aces and Eights versus Shark Boy and Eric Young. Or like I've said before, you might as well have the McMahon family versus the Gobbledygooker, R-Truth, and the Bash and Booger, and led by Santino Marella. It just doesn't really work, really. So, I think that, as I said, that, with AEW, one of the criticisms is that it's all friends wrestling. And that's why the emphasis has gone away, really. And as I said, it's really also, as I said, that you need a creative director. You need somebody that needs to be that Stanley Kubrick type to say, okay, well, this works, and we're going to keep it. This is bullshit. This is how we're going to modify it, or this is bullshit, and this is not going to make money. So we got to end some things, really. And I think that I understand Tony doesn't want that, because part of it is a sensitive ego, and part of it is some people are afraid to give up to control because they don't like being told that they're wrong. And sometimes that can come from a lot of insecurities, and that can come from maybe Tony was bullied a lot, and he doesn't like being in the role of, maybe he has some potential, maybe there's things that he can do really great, and he doesn't want to take a back seat because he feels like he's never going to be heard, really. I've done filmmaking, and I know what it's like to have ideas or really believe in my ideas and really believe that my ideas will be revolutionary. I know what it's like to have actors kind of say, no, we're going to do my thing, and then it actually works, or sometimes it doesn't work. It's very hard to, step down from power, but sometimes we just got to do that because, sometimes we don't have things figured out, really. And that's kind of one of the big problems with Tony Khan. He has to be humble to realize that there are some big problems in AEW. There's a de-emphasis problem. And I really think that he doesn't really care about fixing problems, and that's one of the reasons why people have left AEW. And I think that that's the issue. We went from a guy who was passionate about wrestling and a guy who was different from Vince in a lot of different ways to somebody who's a lot like Vince, which is, what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do what I want to do, even if it's not working. I'm going to serve the shit sandwich and make sure the shit sandwich works, really, instead of just, being humble to realize that there's bigger problems. So I appreciate Novi for everything that he said. I just want to give my insight to it, and that's that.